I have a history of sexual abuse, and at a very, very early age, unbeknown to me, because at 2 years old, I have no concept of what dissociation is. It's only as I've got older and been able to understand and reflect, I was able to dissociate, to shut down from the trauma as a means to survive it. Dissociation, to put it in very simple terms for me, it's shut down. I shut down. Now, at the time of the sexual abuse, that was a very effective coping mechanism. I think present day, it's less so, because when you shut down, you isolate yourself. So you become very introspective, you go inside yourself, and that can lead to feelings of isolation, feeling depressed. You're very much in touch with your sadness inside, and it can, if it escalates, lead to really severe feelings such as suicidality. It is very effective when you're suffering from trauma in that moment, but as a sort of resource that's become habitual, it can be quite negative sometimes, and you have to learn to recognize when that is happening. Dissociation takes many forms. When you have something like DID, you have every form of dissociation on the spectrum. So, for example, I suffer with something called derealization. And what that means is that when I am dissociated, the world can look very different. So colours can be muted or more vivid. The size of objects can be bigger or smaller. So, for example, a tree might look bigger or a tree might look smaller. So there's a real feeling of you are dissociated, detached from the world. It looks in dissociation, you're looking at it through a very different lens, and you feel excuse me, and you feel very detached from it. The other form of dissociation that I experience is depersonalization, and that's an odd one as well, in that your body feels very detached. So it might be that I can look at my hand and it won't feel like my hand. I have the propensity to leave my body. So that means that I can dissociate to the point that I will be looking down at myself, which happens a lot in trauma. So whenever there's any real distressing situation, it's as if you're observing it, you're not actually in it. And again, that's a really effective strategy to manage whatever is happening to you.
Once I understood what the kind of dissociated feelings were, which wasn't until I was probably in my 30s or 40s, again, it was the kind of understanding of what it was, that this was a kind of protective mechanism that my brain, it was actually a healthy thing, that my brain was just shutting off, so I didn't have to deal with these emotions. Now and again, even now, I sometimes go into a bit of a panic mode, but I have kind of strategies now that help me. I just remind myself what's going on, and I just give myself a little bit of time just to calm down rather than to let myself fall straight into that kind of panic. I just have a way of saying, no, this is what's happening. You just need to breathe. You just need to take a minute, and it usually just calms down again.
Dissociation is a spectrum, but in my case, I'm on the very end of the spectrum because I have dissociative identity disorder. And what that means is, at the time of my trauma, my mind had the ability to fragment and develop other parts, alters, personalities, whatever word you wish to call them. I call them parts, to take the responsibility of the trauma for me. Now, that wasn't a conscious choice. It was something that happened very organically. And I don't think it was anything I was even aware of at the time. But what it meant was that I could flee the trauma. I didn't have to be present. And these parts that I developed were able to take that trauma for me. And I think it's an incredible, ingenious coping mechanism of the mind. I find it absolutely fascinating that the mind can do that. And when you actually think about dissociation, it's very logical, it's very creative. There is nothing insane about it. There is nothing crazy about it. It is a coping mechanism, and a very, very effective coping mechanism, and a very ingenious one, I think.
Prior to hitting my 40th birthday, I had no idea I had DID. But when I reflect back, there were periods of my life when it was pretty obvious that there was something not quite right. Like there were periods when the anorexia became very dominant, but it was like my head kept going to work, managing, bringing up the family and doing that, while my body exhibited these sort of experiences. So I'd have two years of being very anorexic, very, very thin, pretty obvious to everybody else that things weren't right, whereas I was just getting on with life. The other one was like OCD. That part might take over the body for a couple of years, and that would be very dominant. But again, the head kept going. But when I got to 40, a very traumatic experience in my current life actually then led to the dissociative barriers beginning to break down, and my beginning to understand that life was a bit more complicated than I'd thought. And I had to begin to face that I needed help and sought help, which was not easy, but got the right help eventually.
I didn't know what was going on. I honestly, I thought it was going crazy. And I ended up, I took myself to a psychiatrist. Thank goodness he knew about dissociative disorders and really understood. And he said, look, you're not going mad. What you're experiencing is the normal survival responses that happen, and they're responses to criminally abnormal circumstances. The thing is, the dissociative disorder is there for a very important reason, because that was how you got by and how you got through and how you got to be an adult and survive. It's not the sort of condition that, you have your appendix out and it's all better. It's much more adapting and learning to live with the facts of the history, but in a way that it's not kind of center stage. It's not just, you can get to a place where it's not controlling every day of your life anymore and have much more normal experiences. It took me a while to accept that I wasn't going to be cured, because obviously I can't be as if it never happened, because what happened partly formed who I am. But at the same time, I can live a really good quality of life now. And of course, there's still occasional symptoms and what have you, but on a day-to-day basis, most people would, pretty much everybody, wouldn't actually know that I had any disorder, and I can enjoy life. It wasn't a completely straightforward journey early on, because I knew I had some issues. I knew I had things that I needed to sort out. But when I tried to talk to them about people who didn't have an understanding of trauma, obviously they weren't necessarily unkind, but they couldn't understand, and they couldn't kind of accompany me on a kind journey forward. So it took a few goes before I found the right kind of help. And I suppose it's just, don't give up. There is hope. There really is. Just keep asking for what you need. And, I got there. I've come a huge long way forward since I found the right kind of help from the right kind of people, and it's there is a way forward. Always is hope. There's a thing from the Sidran Trust which says that of all the conditions that you can get that are kind of consequent on really bad childhood experiences, dissociative disorders may be the ones with the best prognosis, because lots of things are still left intact by the process of dissociation. It preserves some normality of function and thinking and all the rest of it, although it doesn't feel like it at times. But as you learn to come out of it and not need the dissociative processes so much, there really can be very good recovery.